Sweethearts Old. Lucky Sweethearts Book 1. By Rachel A. Anderson. Produced and directed by Rachel Anderson. Copyright 2022. For those who still have the courage to love and be loved. Prologue. We're so sorry for your loss. 19-year-old Marissa Lambert just nodded as the Hendersons from down the street came into view, the pity in their eyes unmistakable. Thank you. Her hand had started going numb sometime in the last 5 minutes, though she couldn't tell whether it was from how many hands she'd shaken or if it was just an extension of the emotional listlessness which had settled over her. Mrs. Henderson pulled her into a hug as she whispered, "They're in a better place, sweetie." And they went together. That's the important thing. If Marissa was her usual self, she might have reacted differently. Instead, she just glared at the woman as her thoughts whirled. My siblings and I are all alone now, and that's the important thing? That they're in a better place and that they went together? She wanted to scream, but that would be frowned upon in such a solemn time. Instead, she mumbled her thanks that they'd attended the funeral, and let the Hendersons continue down the receding line. With a small sigh, she turned to one of the partners in her dad's accounting firm. The balding, kind-faced man caught her hand in both of his. If there's anything we can do, don't hesitate to call. It wasn't the place, but she managed a thin smile. Well, I could use a job. The statement didn't seem to surprise him, and he nodded. Call my office in the morning, and we'll set something up. There was a commotion as someone pushed their way through the crowd up to where she stood, capturing the attention of everyone in the room, including her. Her heart leaped as she saw him emerge directly before her. He was here. Riss, I came as soon as I heard. For a moment, it appeared the fog was lifting. She stared at the boy, dressed in jeans and a hooded sweatshirt in a sea of black and navy blue suits, his normally clean-shaven chin shadowed with light brown stubble. He didn't hesitate, just pulled her to his chest, wrapping his arms around her as tears stung her eyes. She let her eyelids drift closed as she reached up and returned the hug, the comfort of his presence cracking through the shell of her emotional walls. Declan? He ran one hand from the top of her head to the base of her neck. It's okay. I'm here. She trembled in his embrace, afraid that she wouldn't be able to stand on her own if he let her go. How did you know I was here? Your roommate told me what happened. I got in my car and drove all night. He pulled her back so he could look at her. How are you? Are you okay? She couldn't speak, just drunk in the fresh mountain scent of his aftershave as he tugged her back to him, whispering gentle, kind words that she wasn't alone, she'd be okay. When she finally let go of him and wiped away her tears, she noticed that the crowd of well-wishers, which only a moment ago had seemed to stretch out of her line of sight, had dissipated. She wasn't sure who she could thank, but the break from the never-ending stream of platitudes gave her the first breath of relief in almost a week. Declan disappeared, returning a few moments later with a plate overfilled with potatoes, pasta, and mixed vegetables. Off to the side were 2 of her favorite double chocolate cookies. You should eat something. Mom said you might not have much of an appetite, but she said I should at least put something in front of you. She stared at the plate, the stupor crowding back in on her. She couldn't eat this much food even on a normal day, and the thought of eating right now made her physically ill. Still, she mechanically lifted a cherry tomato to her lips. Declan sat so close to her that his knees touched hers, his hand on her back. I think I should stay with you tonight. Marissa shook her head. Mom and Dad won't. Emotion grew in her throat and squelched the rest of her sentence. He squeezed her arm, recognizing her slip. I'll just bunk with one of the boys or I'll sleep on the couch. I just want to be there if you need me. It shouldn't be a problem. She could hear what he didn't say. Staying over at her house wouldn't be a problem with his parents. They wouldn't worry about him. Hers would never worry about her again. She must have cried all her tears earlier because she had dry eyes now. Though she wasn't sure how she felt about his offer, she knew what he expected her to say. Thank you. The sound of something crackling on the stove caught Marissa's attention the next morning as she stumbled down the stairs. I must have overslept. Did everyone get to school on time? Declan nodded, still clad in the same jeans and t-shirt as the day before, his shoes and sweatshirt discarded by the front door. Cassie didn't want to go, but I drove her, and she seemed fine by the time she walked in. He pulled the pan from the stove. I made breakfast. Food. Again. She'd only just emerged from her bedroom, dressed in sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, and he thought she was hungry. She hadn't even showered or put on her makeup yet, choosing instead to throw her chestnut-colored hair into a ponytail. What made him think if she didn't have the energy for either of those things, she would have energy for breakfast? Frankly, if she didn't have an appointment to meet with her parents' lawyer later today, she would have stayed in bed longer. Then, she caught sight of the flowers in the center of the table, all yellow and orange and pink and alive, nestled against dark green foliage. She wanted to throw them across the room. They represented everything she didn't feel right now. She should have been grateful. Even in this strange grief haze, she knew she should have been grateful for everything Declan had done for her family over the last couple of days. He'd been nothing but kind, even carrying little Cassie up to bed last night after the 10-year-old refused to leave Marissa's side for her usual bedtime. Declan plated the French toast with a pat of butter and a drizzle of maple syrup before he put it in front of her. "It's your favorite." She didn't even pick up her fork before she looked up at him. "Why are you here?" His hazel eyes clouded in confusion. "Remember? The funeral?" "I don't mean why are you in my house, Declan? I'm not an idiot." She crossed her arms and leaned back in the chair. "I mean, why are you here?" "In Denver." He sat beside her, squinting at her as if he was measuring what kind of threat level he was dealing with. "Have I done something wrong?" She rolled her eyes. "I didn't invite you to this funeral. So why are you here?" He pulled away from her, the hurt in his eyes clear even in her muddled brain. "I thought it was an oversight." "You didn't want me here?" "I want you here, but I can't have you here." She knew the instant the words fell out of her lips that they wouldn't make sense, but what was she supposed to do? Her brain felt like mush. How could she explain what she was thinking, what she was feeling? His lips fell open as he cocked his head in her direction. The amusement tugging at the corner of his lips only angered her further. What's that supposed to mean? She sighed in resignation and picked up her fork. Maybe she wasn't hungry, but it would be better to pretend to go along than to have this fight now. "Nothing. You're here now. Let's just pretend this never happened." She attacked her French toast like it was a steak, her knife and fork clattering against the ceramic of her plate. Declan heaved a sigh of relief and unfolded his lanky form from the kitchen chair. He headed to the sink, presumably to start on a load of dishes. "Good, because whether you like it or not, you need me." She dropped her fork and knife, that irrational anger washing over her again. "No, I don't. Why does everyone think I need help with this? I can do this." Declan's sandy head bobbed as he loaded the dishwasher. "Eventually, yeah, maybe. You probably can do this. We'll transfer to UC Denver. We'll get jobs, and we'll handle this. Right now, however, we've got to slap something together so you can finish out your semester. I've been in touch with the university, and they said, I'm not going back to the university, Declan." His eyebrows shot up into his hairline, and even now she knew it wasn't because she had interrupted him, but because of what she'd interrupted him to say. "You're not what?" She gave up the pretense of eating. "I'm taking an incomplete for the semester and transferring to community college." Community college? UC Denver offered you a violin scholarship, same as Northwestern. It's not the same program, but you can, at least, keep working on your degree. I'm not studying music anymore, Dec. He stared at her. What? Why not? She pressed a hand to her forehead. I don't have the luxury anymore. I called my dad's friend and got a job as a receptionist with my dad's accounting firm. I start on Monday. He took a step toward her. You hate math. Why on earth would you go into accounting? Pain went through her like a knife at the thought of giving up her dreams, and she wanted to break down and cry in his arms. At the same time, she refused to do so. Music may have been her passion, but this was the real world. For better or worse, she had to grow up now. Look, it was a nice dream for a while, but I have to face facts. I need to support myself and my siblings. I can't do that getting $20 here and there to play for weddings. Marissa looked at her hands, which she'd once thought were ugly given how muscular they were from her years of playing the violin. Hands Declan had once claimed he found beautiful because of the emotion they could pull from the instrument. Not that they'd do so anymore, though. No, the days of dreaming of headlining at Carnegie Hall were behind her. She managed a thin smile she could tell didn't reach her eyes, but one look at his expression told her he could see past the veneer. Besides, it's a receptionist job. Not accounting. I don't have to do anything but smile and answer telephones. Declan knelt in front of her, his eyes bright with hope as he took her hands in his. So, I'll transfer to UC Denver, too. We'll get married, and I'll work in construction with my dad while I finish my engineering degree. We can do this, Marissa. Married? At 19? The room spun as the panic set in. He wanted to marry her. He wanted to get married and have babies and grow old. She was only just starting to wrap her brain around helping Garrett, Stephen, and Cassie get through the rest of their school years. Marissa had 8 years ahead of her where she would be both sister and parent to the three of them, and she already didn't know if she could do that on top of giving up every dream she'd ever had for her life. But to do all that and be a new bride as well? It was all too much. She pulled her hands out of Declan's and raced to the nearest bathroom. The nausea was more emotional than physical, but that didn't stop her stomach from forcibly evicting the few bites of French toast she'd choked down a few minutes earlier. Her life was crumbling before her very eyes, and it was everything she could do to keep from falling apart with the strain of it. When she was sure that her stomach had finished its rebellion, she got to her feet. In the mirror, she caught Declan's slumped shoulders as he stood outside the bathroom. His tan skin pale and tinted green with what he'd just witnessed. I take it you weren't a fan of the proposal, then? I mean, I'm the first person to admit it could have been more romantic, but I didn't think the idea of marrying me would sicken you. She rinsed out her mouth and spit into the sink. When she'd finished, she leaned against the vanity, her heart heavy for what she was about to say. I think it would be best if we pretended that it didn't happen. The throwing up or the proposal? She didn't answer, just let her gaze drop to the ceramic sink. She hoped he'd be able to read between the lines. Because you don't love me? She turned back to face him, her heart aching not just for her loss, but for what it was doing to him. To them. Declan, however, didn't seem surprised. His hand was in his pocket as if they were talking about what restaurant to order from. That was until she looked in his eyes. Those hazel eyes, which could never lie to her. They almost radiated insecurity. Insecurity she'd planted here. Now. Today. She swallowed as tears pricked her eyes. You know I love you. He stepped closer to her again, his long legs bringing him almost exactly to where she stood as the hope in his eyes surged again like a fire stoked back to life from dying embers. Then, why not marry me? I'll be a good husband, an able partner. I mean, look at this morning. I helped get Garrett, Stephen, and Cassie off to school, so you could sleep in. Made you breakfast. I was going to pick Cassie up while you were with the lawyer this afternoon. She rested her hands on his arms. It was more than anyone else had done. And I'm very grateful for that. He cupped her face in his hands. You have to know that the pain won't last forever, Riss. Let me be here for you. At some point, life has to get back to normal. The words jarred something jagged loose inside her, and she pulled out of his soothing, comfortable embrace. Normal? Declan, I'm in the middle of a seismic shift in my life. Last week, the biggest problem in my life was whether you wanted to watch an action film or a chick flick like I wanted. This week, I have to worry about whether my parents had enough life insurance money for me to pay off the mortgage. The fact that you think this is the right time to propose marriage says a lot about what different lives we lead now." He stepped back from her and shoved his hands into the pockets of his jeans, his sandy brown curls dropping into his face as his shoulders slumped, though whether in shame or disappointment, she couldn't quite tell. "Well, I don't think I can just pretend that nothing happened here, Riss. I drove all night to come to your parents' funeral. I proposed marriage, proposed uprooting my life so I could help you, and you turned me down. That's a big deal." She wanted to cry. How had everything gotten so upside down and backward? She wasn't supposed to be breaking up with Declan today. She wasn't supposed to be seeing a lawyer today. She was supposed to be sitting in music theory learning about Neapolitan chords and harmonic minor scales, or something like that. She wasn't supposed to be here. She crossed her arms over her stomach, the waves of grief washing back over her. Only this time, they weren't just for her parents or her old life, they were for Declan. "You proposed marriage because you wanted to protect me from how my life has to change. Nobody can protect me from that. In fact, I might even love you just for trying, but it won't work. It can't work." He was quiet for a long moment. "I always thought we would get married, Marissa. This is just a little sooner than I expected. That's all." The vulnerability in those hazel eyes broke her heart, and for a moment, she wanted to say yes. She wanted to run to the courthouse and buy into this idea that marrying him would be the answer to all her problems, her loneliness, her fear, her hopelessness. But even if she did, she would still wake up in this house tomorrow morning. Her dreams would still lay shattered next to her parents' graves. She would still have to raise her siblings, provide for them, protect them. Her childhood would still be a distant memory. No, she couldn't make this decision in the haze of grief. Even if she felt interminably alone in the meantime. She slid down to the floor, her knees close to her chest as she cried. It wasn't fair. Declan sat beside her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and pulled her closer. She balled his t-shirt in her fists as they cried together. She didn't know how long they'd sat there before she wiped her eyes. From the look on Declan's face, she knew it was over. Knew it had been over the moment she'd left the table to throw up after his proposal. She put a hand on his chest, the steady beating of his heart doing more to strengthen her for this ending than anything else could. "I wanted it to be you. I thought it would be you." He brushed the strand of her hair, which had fallen into her face, back behind her ear. "Me, too." Another wave of emotion threatened her as she looked up at him. "I just can't right now. You understand?" He nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to stay strong for her. "Yeah." Her heart felt like it was splitting in two as she finished what she had planned to say. "I wish I could promise I'd be ready, but I can't guarantee that. And like you said, you can't just ignore that I rejected you." She exhaled as she looked at his t-shirt instead of his face. It would be so much harder to say this if she had to look into those caring eyes. "So, don't wait for me to catch up, okay? Go find yourself a nice girl. You deserve that much." He caressed her cheek in his hand. "So do you." She broke again, the tears slipping down her cheeks as he pulled her back into a hug. His strong, sculpted arms squeezed her so tightly, she was almost afraid he would never let her go. Almost afraid that he would. "I love you, Marissa Lambert." She reached up and kissed him one last time, wishing she could capture this moment and make it last forever. "I love you, too, Declan Pierce."